Welcome back to the 50 State Cold Case Spotlight. Today we are in Pennsylvania for day 3, and I will be spotlighting the case of Carol Ann Dougherty. And just a warning for those that have a hard time with children's cases, this is one of those really hard children's cases to cover. So if you need to scroll away, that is perfectly okay. I'm going to do this in 2 parts, and they will be released today. In October of 1962, Carol Ann was 9 and a 5th grader at St. Mark's in Bristol Township. Her father, Frank, describes her as more than pretty. She was also independent, in the top third of her 5th grade class, and he said that Carol Ann was an avid reader and she really enjoyed Nancy Drew and the Bobbsey Twins series. On October 22nd, after returning home from school around 3 p.m., Carol Ann told her mother, Dorothy, 42, that she had 2 books she wanted to return to the library. The librarian said that Carol Ann loved to read and checked out mystery novels often. Dorothy told Carol Ann that she could ride her bike to the library, and Carol Ann strapped her books to her bicycle and drove off. On the way to the library, she passed the church, and as she typically did when she passed the church, investigators and family believe she stopped to pray. At 4:30 p.m., Dorothy becomes concerned because Carol hasn't returned home from the library, which wasn't far from the house, and she should have been home by then. Dorothy decided that she would drive to the library and just make sure that Carol Ann was okay, and that's when she would see Carol Ann's bicycle leaned up against the side of the church, and her library books still on the back of her bike. Dorothy decided to go into the church and look around to see if she could locate Carol Ann. She wasn't in the pews, and she couldn't find her around, and she said she felt this feeling that something was wrong. She had this feeling of fear. So she returned home, and she found her husband, Frank, and she explained to him what was going on, and they decided to go back together. They packed in their youngest daughter, Kay Ellen, who at the time was just 2, and they drove back to the church. Dorothy waited in the car while Frank went into the church. Frank started walking around the church looking for his daughter, and when he went up to the stairs to the choir, Frank found his daughter's lifeless body lying on the landing. Carol Ann was found naked from the waist down, one of her shoes was off, and a sock was rolled into a ball beside her body. He saw marks on her throat and he checked for a pulse, but there was none. Frank ran down the stairs and found Monsieur Paul Ballard, who followed Frank to the back of the landing to confirm the sign of no life. Monsieur Bird ran down the stairs to phone the police while Reverend Michael Carroll administered last rites. Police Chief Vincent Vergelli and 15 others, including volunteer firemen and Bucks County detectives and state police, all converged on the church. They roped off the street and kept the growing onlookers away from the scene. The first thing that Chief Vergelli noted right away were there marks on the stairs that indicated that Carol Ann had been dragged up the stairs, most likely feet first. An autopsy would confirm that Carol Ann had been strangled and essayed. Investigators believe that the killer used a belt to strangle Carol Ann because she had scratches on her neck that they believe were made by a buckle. In Carol's hand, they were able to recover hairs, which they do believe were pubic hairs. Investigators also collected over 30 different samples of pubic hair around the floor around Carol Ann's body, along with cigarette butts. The crowd outside of the church grew into the hundreds, and it was up to Chief Vergelli to have to tell the community in that moment that there were no suspects and no leads. The community of Bristol changed forever. The school superintendent would issue a Halloween advisory warning parents not to let their children stray too far away from home. Children were no longer seen walking back and forth to school alone. They were now accompanied by their parents. The neighborhood streets, normally filled with kids playing into the night, were now empty. The first thing investigators did was focus in on every sexual offender in the area. Hundreds of men were brought in for questioning, and many were given lie detector tests. Investigators also took pubic hairs from dozens of males, including 3 St. Mark's parish priests and the boys that attended the St. Mark's school. Many of the men that they brought in as potential suspects, investigators say that they admitted to a bunch of potential crimes, but none of them had to do with Carol Ann. Until a handyman named Frank told investigators that he murdered Carol Ann. Detectives said this man was mentally challenged, and they quickly concluded that he made up the story. On March 17, 1964, another 9-year-old girl named Marie Chervelle would be found essayed, strangled, bound, and gagged. Investigators believe that despite the 2-year difference and the 90 miles apart, that these 2 cases could very well be linked. Maurice was last seen at the St. Joseph Church in Hazleton the same day as many as 1,500 people from Bristol had traveled to Hazleton for a championship basketball game between Bristol and the Montrose High School. Investigators say that Bristol was the common denominator along with the similarities in both of these crimes. While they could not confirm or deny a link with evidence, investigators stated that if a lead popped up in either case, they would communicate that and see if the suspect was linked to one or the other. Investigators collected a lot of evidence in Carol Ann's case, and it has been tested throughout the years, but based on the way it's been stored and how many times it has been tested, the evidence has been extremely deteriorated over the years. Chief Agarelli kept a framed photo of Carol Ann on his desk until he retired in 1979. He was determined to solve her case, but unfortunately was unable to get it done before he retired. New life would be brought into Carol Ann's case, and it would be reinvestigated and reopened in the 1990s after Philly Burb's publication did a 6-part series on Carol Ann's murder based on the review of the police files and interviews by the original investigator. That's when it was discovered that years of extreme heat and cold in the attic where Carol Ann's evidence was stored had degraded the evidence. The Press Enterprise interviewed Frank in January of 1993, and they asked him how he felt about the case being reopened. Frank said that he and his daughter Kay had renewed hope that Carol Ann's killer may finally be brought to justice. Frank said, quote, "It's not something you dwell on 24 hours a day, but if they could catch somebody tomorrow and shoot him the next day, why, I'm all for it, believe me. Give him as much chance as they gave her," unquote. His daughter Kay nodded in agreement, saying, quote, "We'll be fighting over the switch at the electric chair," unquote. In 2022, 58 years after Maurice's murder, the Pennsylvania State Police announced that they had identified her killer as James Fort, 22 at the time, who lived a few blocks away from Maurice's home. He was a bartender in the area, but had no connection to her family, and they believe he died in 1980 due to a heart attack. Maurice's case would be solved by the help of Eric Schubert, a 20-year-old college history major and an amateur genealogist from Medford, New Jersey. The work that these genealogists do is incredible, and I would love to do an episode later on how they take DNA and these massive family trees and get down to the main suspect, and maybe one day we'll cover that. But there are many great articles out there if you are interested. Okay guys, head over to part 2. It's not super long. I just didn't want to try to push it all into one video. 2 of Carol Ann Dougherty's case. When it comes to Carol Ann's case in 2024, investigators were able to use new DNA technology to narrow down their suspects list. Throughout the years, they had about 5 main suspects that they were looking at, but this new technology enabled them to narrow it down to 2. Reverend Joseph Sabadish, a parish priest, and William Schrader, who lived just down the corner from the church. Sabadish would become a suspect when he could not account for his time during Carol Ann's murder. Decades after Carol Ann's murder, the District Attorney's Office of Philadelphia would label Sabadish, quote, "a predator priest," unquote. The Attorney's Office had conducted a grand jury investigation into the SA abuse of children in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and that's when Sabadish came on the DA's radar. Schrader would become a suspect in the 90s when they reinvested Carol Ann's case and realized not only could they not account for his whereabouts at the time of Carol Ann's murder, but he had also spent time in prison in Louisiana in the 70s for unaliving a teenager by arson and had been accused multiple times of essaying young girls. When Schrader was extradited and placed before the Bucks County grand jury during the reinvestigation efforts of Carol Ann's murder, he invoked the Fifth Amendment right not to self-incriminate. Today, both suspects are deceased, and Kay, Carol Ann's baby sister, is still waiting on a resolution and is hopeful that police will identify her killer, saying, quote, "Maybe today science can answer the question. I know my parents are at peace because they've since closed their eyes and aren't here anymore. But I would like to know, and my family would like to know," unquote. As of November 2024, DNA testing paid for by special grants and private credits is being approached by Othram Labs out of Woodland, Texas. So far, there are no results, but these things take time, and hopefully we will have them soon. If you have any information in Carol Ann's case, please contact the Pennsylvania State Police at 814-332-6911. I just want to remind everybody that no case is too old to be solved. When you have dedicated investigators, you have family members, and you have communities behind pushing forward on these cases, they are able to get solved. I don't believe that cases are unsolvable. I believe that people are afraid to come forward. I believe that a lot of cases get lost in the shuffle with so many cases that we have. But when we build a community and we keep sharing their names and their stories, we can solve these cases. We can help be a part of that by simply sharing their names and their faces. Thank you so much for taking the time to get to know Carol Ann today. And don't forget, when you see those missing and murder posts on social media, hit like and share, because every time we share a face, we get closer to solving a case. And I will see you guys back here for Pennsylvania Day 4 tomorrow.